You were never taught mental peace. You were taught distraction, control, and hope. But Spinoza points to something far more powerful. You know what it feels like when the mind will not stop. When you lie down and the thoughts begin. When you finish one worry and another one rises to take its place. When the day is over but the weight inside your chest does not leave. You have felt that particular exhaustion that has nothing to do with the body, the kind that comes from carrying the noise of your own thinking all day long, unable to set it down, unable to silence it, unable to find even a few seconds where the mind feels like yours again. You have probably tried. You have tried breathing. You have tried productivity. You have tried removing people, changing routines, filling the silence with music or podcasts, or doing the opposite and forcing yourself into stillness. Maybe you have prayed for calm. Maybe you have built a vision board. Maybe you have convinced yourself that once this specific problem resolves, once this relationship stabilizes, once this career moment arrives, then you will finally feel peace. But the moment comes and peace does not follow. And you begin to suspect that something deeper is wrong, not with the world, with the way you have been taught to understand your own mind. What this video offers is not a technique. It is not a breathing exercise wrapped in philosophical language. What Spinoza offers is far more serious than that. He offers a way of seeing the causes of your mental suffering so clearly that the suffering begins to lose its grip. Not because reality becomes easier, because you become harder to manipulate by forces you do not understand. Peace, as Spinoza teaches it, is not a feeling you chase. It is a state of mind you build through understanding, and that kind of peace cannot be sold to you, cannot be taken from you, and does not depend on whether today was a good day or a terrible one. Most people believe that peace will arrive when conditions improve, when the difficult person leaves, when the debt disappears, when the uncertainty resolves, when the house is quiet, the body is healthy, the future is clear, and the people around you finally behave the way you need them to. This is the peace the world teaches, a peace built entirely on external arrangements, a peace that is really just the temporary absence of visible problems. And the moment one condition shifts, the moment one arrangement breaks, that peace dissolves instantly. Because it was never peace. It was a suspended state of waiting. The terrifying thing about this belief is not that it is false, it is that it feels so reasonable. Of course, you would feel better if things improved. Of course, life would feel lighter with fewer pressures. No one is arguing that circumstances do not affect the mind. But Spinoza saw something that most people miss entirely. He saw that if peace is always a function of what is happening outside you, then you are never actually building peace. You are only managing conditions, and conditions will always change. The fragile peace you protect through arrangement is the same peace that shatters every time reality refuses to cooperate. The hidden enemy is not your job, your relationship, your past, or your future. The hidden enemy is dependency itself. The habit of placing your inner stability entirely in the hands of things that were never designed to hold it. When you make your peace conditional on another person's approval, you have handed your mind over to that person, not symbolically, structurally. Every time they withdraw, your mind destabilizes. Every time they return, it settles. You are not experiencing a relationship, you are experiencing an addiction to an external regulator of your internal state. This is not a moral failure, this is a mechanism. And it operates the same way across every domain of life. When peace requires the future to promise you something good, you become a hostage to anticipation. When peace requires the past to have been different, you become a prisoner of what cannot be changed. When peace requires certainty, you become terrorized by the ordinary unknowns of existence, which are not rare but constant. The mind that ties its stability to external conditions is a mind in permanent negotiation with reality, demanding, hoping, fearing, reacting, never resting, never arriving. And here is what makes this prison so difficult to escape. The walls are invisible because they are built from beliefs you adopted before you knew you were adopting them. You are not born believing that approval creates safety. You are not born believing that certainty is peace. These ideas were installed in you by education, by family, by culture, by every system that taught you to seek the right conditions rather than develop a stable inner ground. You inherited a model of peace that was designed to keep you searching outside yourself. And as long as you follow that model, the mind will remain a storm. Not because you are broken, because the map is wrong. Look at the world that surrounds the modern mind. Notifications that interrupt every moment of stillness. Comparison engines that measure your life against a curated version of someone else's. Productivity systems that tell you rest is acceptable only after you have earned it. Wellness markets that sell you 12 different solutions to the same problem and rotate them seasonally so that none of them can ever fully work. Spiritual content that promises peace if you meditate more, eat better, journal longer, and maintain a morning routine that takes longer than most jobs. Every message from the modern world is the same message at its core. Find the right external practice and calm will follow. This is not liberation. This is optimization dressed in the language of healing. The mind that is constantly optimizing is a mind that has accepted its own restlessness as a permanent condition to be managed, rather than a problem to be understood. Spinoza would not have been impressed by productivity culture. He would not have been moved by the wellness industry. He would have asked a single question that none of these systems ever ask. What is actually causing the unrest? Not how do you suppress it, redirect it, or decorate it with better habits. What is producing it? Because until that question is answered honestly, every tool you add to your life is just a new distraction wearing the costume of a solution. If this is landing somewhere real in you, press the like button before we continue. Not as a gesture toward an algorithm, but because somewhere out there another person is lying awake right now, exhausted by their own thoughts, still convinced that peace is just one better circumstance away. Your like helps this reach them, and this understanding is worth reaching. Baruch Spinoza was not a therapist, he was not a wellness coach, he was a 17th century philosopher who was expelled from his own community for thinking too clearly and too honestly. He lived quietly, ground lenses for a living, refused wealth and academic power, and spent his life building one of the most rigorous philosophical systems in history. He did not flinch from hard questions, he did not offer comfortable answers. And when he turned his attention to the human mind, he saw something that most thinkers before him had either missed or avoided. He saw that the suffering of the mind is not a punishment, not a mystery, and not a random condition. It is an effect, and effects have causes, and causes can be understood. Spinoza did not promise that understanding would make life painless. He made no such claim, and you should distrust anyone who makes it for him. What he argued with extraordinary precision is that a mind which understands the causes of its own emotions is a mind that is less dragged by those emotions, not immune, less dragged, less enslaved to reactions it cannot explain, less desperate for conditions it cannot control. He called the alternative to this understanding human bondage. Not a dramatic metaphor, a precise diagnosis. When the mind is governed by forces it does not understand, it is in bondage. And when it begins to understand those forces, it begins, slowly, to be free. Spinoza's central insight about emotion is this: every emotion has a cause. Every shift in your inner state, every wave of anxiety, every flare of irritation, every sudden sadness, every unexpected joy, every moment of dread that arrives without obvious reason, all of it is produced by something. Nothing happens in the mind by accident. Nothing floats in from nowhere. The emotional weather inside you is not random, it is the result of causes. Some of those causes are visible. Some are buried deep in memory, in imagination, in desire, in the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you need to survive. The problem is not that emotions exist. The problem is that most people experience emotions as though they have no cause. Something shifts inside them and they feel it as pure fact. I am anxious, I am sad, I am afraid. Not something has produced this state in me and I can learn what that something is. Just the raw experience of being seized. And when you are seized by an emotion you cannot explain, you are in a position of pure passivity. You are what Spinoza called a passive sufferer, not passive in the sense of lazy, passive in the sense of being acted upon rather than acting. The emotion moves through you without your understanding, and because you do not understand it, you cannot address its actual root. This is why Spinoza's philosophy begins not with prescription, but with examination. Before you can address the emotion, you must name it honestly. Before you can name it honestly, you must trace it to its cause, not the surface cause. Not the person you can easily blame or the situation you can point to as the obvious trigger. The deeper cause, the desire underneath the anger, the fear underneath the sadness, the dependency underneath the anxiety, the imagined future that the present moment seems to threaten. When you begin to trace emotions to their real causes, something changes in the mind. The emotion does not disappear. but it stops feeling like a verdict from reality and starts feeling like information about what you depend on and what you fear losing. Spinoza draws a distinction that deserves to be written on the wall of every modern mind: the distinction between passive emotions and active understanding. A passive emotion is one that happens to you without your comprehension. It arrives, it takes over, it determines your reactions. And then it leaves and you are slightly more exhausted than before, slightly less certain of yourself, slightly more dependent on something external to make you feel stable again. Most people spend the majority of their emotional lives in this condition, not because they are weak, because they were never shown the alternative. Active understanding is not the suppression of emotion. That distinction is essential. Spinoza was not arguing for stoic coldness or emotional numbness. He was arguing for comprehension. When you understand what is producing a feeling, you are no longer simply inside it. You are also above it in the sense that you can see it clearly. You can ask, what is this telling me about what I believe I need? What dependency is being exposed here? What imagined threat is driving this? And when you can ask those questions with honesty, the emotion changes its quality. It becomes something you can think inside of, rather than something that thinks for you. This is what Spinoza means by a free mind, not a mind without emotion. A mind that understands its emotions well enough to respond rather than simply react. The difference between a reaction and a response is the presence of understanding. A reaction is automatic, compelled by causes you have not examined. A response is deliberate, shaped by a mind that sees the cause and chooses how to move. Peace, in Spinoza's framework, is not the absence of emotional experience. It is the growing capacity to understand what your emotions are made of, where they come from, and what they are actually telling you about the structure of your desires and fears. That understanding is the beginning of inner freedom. If you have spent years unable to find lasting peace, the conclusion that forms slowly in the mind is often a devastating one. That something is wrong with you specifically, that others manage to feel calm, to move through difficulty without collapsing, to rest inside uncertainty without becoming frantic, and that you cannot, that you are somehow more sensitive, more flawed, more fundamentally unsuited to the business of living than the people around you appear to be. This conclusion is not only painful, it is philosophically wrong, and Spinoza would reject it completely. Your restlessness is not evidence of a broken self. It is evidence of a mind that has been trained to seek stability in places that cannot provide it. Every anxious thought, every racing loop, every desperate attempt to control what will not be controlled, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs of a mechanism that is working exactly as it was shaped to work. A mechanism that was never given the tools to understand itself. When Spinoza looks at a suffering mind, he does not see failure. He sees a system operating under inadequate understanding. And inadequate understanding is not a character flaw. It is a condition. And conditions can change when causes are seen clearly. This reframe is not soft comfort. It is philosophically precise. Spinoza believed that every human being, without exception, acts from their understanding of reality as it appears to them in the moment. The person in mental anguish is not choosing suffering. They are acting in accordance with what they understand or fail to understand about their own causes. Expand the understanding, and the behavior, the emotional pattern, the mental noise, all of it begins to shift, not because willpower increases, because the vision of what is actually happening becomes clearer. You are not broken. You are operating with a map that was drawn before you had any say in the cartography. Imagine the mind as a room. In that room, there are many voices speaking at the same time. One voice is desire, telling you what you need in order to feel complete. One voice is fear, telling you what you must avoid in order to stay safe. One voice is hope, promising that something in the future will finally make the noise stop. One voice is memory, replaying moments from the past that still carry unresolved weight. These voices are not speaking gently. They are competing. They are pulling the mind in different directions simultaneously. And the result is not peace. The result is noise. Constant, exhausting, relentless noise. This is not imagination. This is a precise description of what happens in a mind governed by what Spinoza called the passions. When desire, fear, hope, and memory all operate as external forces acting on the mind without being understood, the mind has no coherent center. It is pulled toward what it desires, pushed back by what it fears, suspended in the tension between hope and memory, and unable to rest in the present moment because the present moment is only a battleground for those competing forces. The noise you experience is not neurological weakness. It is the sound of a mind that has not yet found its own ground. Now consider what happens when even one of those voices is examined honestly. When you notice fear arising and ask, what does this fear depend on? What does it believe will happen? What does it imagine it is protecting? The moment you examine the voice rather than simply obeying it, something shifts. The fear does not vanish, but it becomes an object of thought rather than the subject of your existence. You are looking at it rather than looking from inside it. This is the beginning of the shift Spinoza describes, not a silencing of the mind, a clarification of what is moving inside it. The mind becomes quieter not when the voices stop, but when the mind stops being overwhelmed by voices it cannot name. A storm is terrifying when you have no name for it and no understanding of what produces it. The same storm, understood as a natural phenomenon with identifiable causes, remains powerful but becomes something you can navigate. Spinoza's philosophy is the practice of learning to navigate your own interior storm, not by demanding that it stop, by understanding what weather patterns produce it, what conditions make it worse, and what clarity of understanding makes you less vulnerable to being capsized by it. Here is the belief disruption that most people resist most strongly. Most of what is called the desire for peace is actually the desire for control, the desire for reality to stop being what it is and start being what you need it to be. The desire for other people to behave consistently, the desire for the future to confirm your expectations, the desire for the past to have been different. None of these are desires for peace. They are desires for a particular arrangement of reality. And peace built on the demand that reality arrange itself according to your preferences is not peace. It is a wish, an endlessly frustrated wish. Spinoza does not say this to be harsh. He says it because the truth of it is what makes actual peace possible. If the desire for peace is really a disguised demand for control, then the mind will never rest. Because reality does not answer to demands. It operates by necessity, by causes and effects that existed long before any individual preference entered the equation. The beginning of genuine peace is the moment you stop demanding that reality be different and start asking what this reality is actually asking of your understanding. Not surrender, not passivity, understanding. The willingness to see clearly before you insist on being seen first. If something has shifted in how you understand peace right now, if you are beginning to see that peace is not control but clarity, write the word freedom in the comments. Not as a performance, as a marker of where your mind stands at this moment in the journey. Others will read it and recognize themselves. That recognition is itself a form of light. The first practice Spinoza points toward is deceptively simple and genuinely difficult. Name the cause, not the symptom, not the story you build around the symptom. The actual cause of the mental unrest you are experiencing. When the mind becomes noisy, most people immediately look outward. They identify the trigger, the message that arrived, the decision that was made without them, the person who did not respond the way they needed. The trigger is real, but the trigger is not the cause. The cause is what inside you made that trigger capable of producing this particular emotional reaction. Begin with a question. What is this emotion depending on? If you feel anxious because of uncertainty about the future, the cause is not the uncertain future. The cause is the belief that certainty is required for your mind to feel safe. That belief, that dependency, is the actual cause of the suffering. The future is simply the occasion that revealed it. And this matters because you cannot control the future. But you can examine the belief. You can ask, when did this belief form? What did it promise to protect? Is it still protecting me, or has it become a cage I mistake for security? This is not a quick exercise. It is a practice that deepens over time. Spinoza understood that adequate ideas, his term for genuine understanding, do not arrive all at once. The mind clears gradually as it develops the habit of looking for causes rather than assigning blame. The first day you ask, what is this emotion depending on, you may find only partial answers. The 10th day, you may find something more honest. The 100th day, you may find that certain emotional patterns have lost their automatic power because you have named their root too many times for them to operate in darkness. This is the slow, unglamorous, deeply serious work of mental peace. The second practice is the practice of separation, learning to distinguish between what is moving through you and what you are. This distinction, which sounds abstract when stated plainly, becomes concrete the moment you try to apply it. When anxiety rises, the untrained mind says, "I am anxious." When sadness arrives, the untrained mind says, "I am sad." When restlessness takes over, the untrained mind says, "This is who I am. I have always been this way. This is my nature." And once an emotion becomes identity, it becomes nearly impossible to examine. You cannot look at something you believe you are made of. Spinoza's philosophy invites a different grammar. Not "I am anxious," but "anxiety is moving through me." Not "I am a restless person," but "a pattern of restlessness has been produced in me by specific causes." This is not denial of the experience. The anxiety is real, the restlessness is real, but the claim that it is your essence, your permanent identity, your defining characteristic, that claim is not reality. It is an interpretation, and interpretations can be revised when the causes behind them are understood more clearly. When you separate an emotional state from your identity, something important happens. You recover the observer. There is now a part of you that is watching the emotion rather than being completely consumed by it. And that observer has access to questions the overwhelmed mind cannot ask. What is this pattern telling me about what I believe I need? When did this pattern establish itself? What does it serve? What would it mean to live without depending on this emotion as a form of self-definition? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the questions that create the possibility of genuine change. Not change imposed from outside by a better circumstance. Change that emerges from inside by a deeper understanding. Spinoza teaches that the mind is shaped by what it encounters. This is not simply a modern wellness observation about environment. It is a philosophical position. Everything you encounter, every person, every conversation, every piece of content, every environment, every habit either increases your power of understanding or decreases it, either adds to your clarity or adds to your noise. And because the mind is shaped by these encounters, choosing them with intention is not a luxury. It is a form of philosophical practice. Consider your daily encounters honestly. The content you consume in the first 30 minutes after waking, the conversations you spend most of your hours inside, the environments where your attention lives, the people whose emotional states most powerfully shape yours, not with moral judgment but with philosophical inquiry. Do these encounters leave the mind clearer or more reactive? Do they increase your capacity to think and observe? Or do they increase the noise of comparison, urgency, and dependency? Spinoza would not call this a list of rules. He would call it an examination of causes. If certain encounters reliably produce anxiety, comparison, and mental fragmentation, that is not coincidence. That is causation. The practice of choosing better encounters is not about building a perfect life. It is about gradually reducing the unnecessary causes of mental agitation that you have the power to reduce. There will always be encounters you cannot control. Difficulty that arrives without permission. Loss that does not ask your preference. But there is a wide territory of daily encounters that most people never examine, never choose, and never change. Not because they cannot, but because they have not yet asked the Spinozist question. What is this encounter actually producing in me? Ask that question consistently, and the answers will begin to reshape how you move through your days, not perfectly, not immediately, but with growing intelligence about the causes of your own inner states. The fourth practice is the most philosophically demanding and the most misunderstood: acceptance. When Spinoza speaks of accepting necessity, he does not mean passive resignation. He does not mean pretending that pain is acceptable when it is not. He does not mean silencing legitimate protest against injustice or abandoning the drive to change what can be changed. He means something more precise and more powerful. He means stopping the mental war against what cannot be changed in this moment. When the mind is at war with reality, it is spending enormous amounts of energy fighting what already is. An event has occurred, a loss has happened, a reality that is not what you wanted has arrived. And the mind spends hours, days, sometimes years generating the internal argument that it should not have happened. That reality was wrong to produce this, that if things had been different, if people had acted differently, if the universe had arranged itself more justly, you would not be here. This argument is real in the sense that it is genuinely felt, and it is useless in the sense that it changes nothing about the event and exhausts everything that could be used for genuine navigation of what follows. Spinoza invites the mind to stop fighting the order of causes, not because the causes were necessarily good or just, but because they were necessary in the sense that they followed from what preceded them. This is not fatalism. It is clarity. When you stop spending energy arguing against what has already happened, that energy becomes available for something Spinoza found far more interesting: understanding what comes next and what your mind can actually do with the reality in front of it. Acceptance in Spinoza's sense is not the end of engagement. It is the clearing of the ground where genuine, intelligent action becomes possible. Peace does not come from forcing reality into a shape you prefer. It comes from the mind that can see reality clearly enough to move within it rather than endlessly against it. Walk back through what this journey has revealed. Peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is not the product of perfect conditions. It is not achieved by silencing thoughts, optimizing habits, or negotiating with reality until it gives you what you need. Peace, as Spinoza teaches it, is a rational achievement. It is the growing clarity of a mind that understands the causes of its own emotional states. When you understand what produces an emotion, you are no longer simply inside it. You are also able to examine it, trace it, name it honestly, and respond to it with something other than automatic reaction. External dependency is the structure of instability. Every time peace is conditioned on what someone else does, on what the future promises, on what the past should have been, peace becomes a hostage held by forces beyond your reach. Spinoza saw this with extraordinary clarity. He called it bondage, not as metaphor, as diagnosis, and the diagnosis carries its own cure. If bondage is the condition of being governed by causes you do not understand, then freedom is the condition of understanding those causes clearly enough to act from your own ground rather than from theirs. This is the Spinozist path. not away from reality, deeper into the understanding of it. There is a version of you that entered this video looking for calm, looking for a technique that might finally make the noise stop. That version of you was operating under the same assumption that most of the world operates under. That peace is something you receive when conditions align. What Spinoza offers is a different identity entirely. Not a person who waits for peace to arrive, but a person who builds understanding. Not someone who begs reality for relief, but someone who examines reality clearly enough to navigate it with growing freedom. This shift is not completed in a single viewing of a single video. Spinoza himself worked for years. He ground lenses, he thought slowly, he revised. He did not promise fast transformation, and neither does this channel. But something can begin here. A new relationship with your own emotional experience. A willingness to ask what causes this rather than simply demanding that it stop. A recognition that the restlessness you carry is not your nature but your condition. And conditions, when their causes are understood, begin to change. Not because you forced them, because understanding itself is a form of power, the deepest form, the one that cannot be taken from you by circumstance. You came here in some form because distraction stopped working, because control turned out to be exhausting, because hope, as beautiful as it is, was not enough to quiet the mind that still did not understand itself. That is where this began. And here is where it stands now. Spinoza's secret to mental peace is not a technique hidden in a forgotten text. It is a way of seeing. It is the decision to understand rather than simply endure, to trace rather than simply react, to build inner ground rather than endlessly search for better outer conditions. The peace he describes is not easy, but it is real. And unlike the peace that depends on circumstances, it is yours. If this understanding matters to you, subscribe to Spinoza Reveals. Not because the algorithm requires it, but because this kind of thinking is rare. Because every new video is another step deeper into the philosophy that Spinoza gave his life to build. Because you deserve a source of thought that takes your mind seriously. That does not sell you comfort when it can offer you something more powerful. Understanding, stay, think, and go further.